You mean to tell me? Ambassador Zixel's translucent appendages trembled with barely contained rage. That this primate is supposed to represent an entire species in the Galactic Council? Actually, the human in question smiled pleasantly while adjusting his perfectly tailored suit. I prefer the term apex predator, with opposable thumbs and a pension plan. Makes for better small talk at parties. The gathered delegates of the council chamber shifted uncomfortably in their anti-grav seats. Some species literally oozed anxiety. The Morphosians were leaving particularly unsightly stains on their cushions. Standing at the center of the vast amphitheater, Ambassador James Sullivan maintained his diplomatic smile, though anyone familiar with human expressions might have noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. The council had expected, well, they weren't quite sure what they'd expected when Earth finally sent their representative. But it certainly wasn't this unremarkably average-looking male specimen in his crisp Earth attire. He wasn't even wearing powered armor, or brandishing any of the infamous human weapons that had the galactic intelligence community in such a tizzy. High Counselor Thex, a being composed primarily of crystalline structures and bureaucratic tedium, cleared what passed for their throat. Ambassador Sullivan, while we appreciate Earth's prompt response to our invitation. Demand, Sullivan corrected cheerfully. Let's call it what it was. You threatened to blockade our solar system unless we sent a representative. I'm just here to make sure everyone plays nice in the cosmic sandbox. Your presence here is merely a formality, Thex continued, as if Sullivan hadn't spoken. Humanity must answer for its aggressive expansion and unauthorized technological developments. The Council has already voted. Without Earth's representative present, Sullivan noted, examining his cufflinks with exaggerated interest. Bit rude, that. And sanctions will be imposed immediately. Furthermore, all human military vessels must stand down and submit to Council inspection. The chamber fell silent, waiting for the human's reaction. Sullivan's smile widened fractionally. That's adorable, he said. Really, I'm touched by your concern, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of our relationship moving forward. Ambassador Zixel's tentacles coiled in preparation for attack, a gesture that wouldn't have been noticeable to most species, but Sullivan had done his homework. His hand casually slipped into his jacket pocket. You see, Sullivan continued, Earth didn't send a diplomat to negotiate our surrender. They sent me to explain why attempting to strong-arm humanity is a monumentally bad idea. Think of me as less of an ambassador and more of a friendly warning label. Is that a threat? Zixel hissed, rising from their seat. Oh no, not at all. Threats are for species who haven't already demonstrated their capabilities. This is just a courtesy heads-up about the facts of life. Fact 1. Humanity doesn't respond well to bullying. Fact 2. Those unauthorized technological developments you're so worried about? They're defensive measures we developed after discovering 17 different species were planning to invade Earth. Yes, we know about those plans. Wave hello to the Proximan delegation. They were particularly creative with their invasion scenarios. The Proximan representatives turned an interesting shade of puce and tried to sink into their seats. Fact 3, Sullivan went on, is that this entire show of force is based on outdated intelligence. While you were voting on sanctions, humanity wasn't sitting idle. Would anyone like to guess how I actually arrived at this station? The council members glanced at each other in confusion. Sullivan had arrived on a standard transport vessel. They'd scanned it thoroughly. No takers? That's fine. The transport ship was a courtesy to make everyone comfortable. I actually stepped through a quantum tunnel in my office on Earth about 10 minutes before this meeting. The ship was automated. And yes, before anyone asks, we've cracked stable quantum tunneling for macro-scale objects. We're quite proud of that one. The chamber erupted in chaos. Quantum tunneling on that scale was theoretically impossible according to every species' scientific understanding. The security implications alone. Order! Thex's crystalline form vibrated at a frequency that made everyone's teeth ache. These outrageous claims are very easy to verify, Sullivan interrupted smoothly. Check your computational networks. About 30 seconds ago, every species represented here received a comprehensive data packet detailing humanity's current technological capabilities, defensive measures, and a formal proposal for peaceful cooperation moving forward. We're really much better at sharing than you've given us credit for. The chamber fell silent again as delegates frantically consulted their devices. The data was there, all right, and it was terrifying in its implications. Of course, Sullivan added. Ambassador Zixel might want to reconsider the attack they're currently planning. The neural disruptor in their tentacles would be rather ineffective against my personal shielding and I would hate to have to demonstrate the countermeasures. Zixel froze, their tentacles still coiled for strike. The neural disruptor was supposed to be undetectable. How did you— We've had time to study everyone's favorite toys, Sullivan said. Humanity's aggressive expansion was largely focused on establishing listening posts and research facilities. We wanted to understand our neighbors before making first contact. Call it paranoia if you like, but it served us well. The Council will not be intimidated by these displays, Thex declared, though their crystalline structure was vibrating at an anxious frequency. Good, Sullivan beamed. Intimidation would be counterproductive. I'm here to establish understanding. Humanity wants peaceful cooperation with the Galactic Council. We want to trade, share knowledge, and work together for the benefit of all species. We just need to be clear about boundaries and mutual respect. He paused, straightening his tie. For example, the battle fleet currently hiding behind your system's 6th gas giant, the one you thought we couldn't detect, it can stay right where it is. Consider it a trust-building exercise. We know it's there, you know we know it's there, and we're choosing not to respond with force. Everybody saves face, and nobody has to find out what happens when you corner a species that turned their entire planet into a fortress because they were concerned about the neighbors. The council chamber had grown so quiet you could hear the environmental systems cycling. Sullivan checked his watch, an antique mechanical piece that several delegates recognized as a subtle reminder of humanity's appreciation for both tradition and precision engineering. Now then, he said cheerfully, shall we discuss that cooperation proposal? I brought coffee and those little cookies everyone likes. Well, everyone who can metabolize glucose, at least. I have alternative refreshments for our silicon-based friends. From his briefcase, Sullivan produced an actual thermal carafe and several packages of cookies. The absurdity of the gesture, following his revelations about quantum tunneling and massive surveillance networks, caused several delegates to emit their species' equivalent of nervous laughter. You humans, Ambassador Zixel said slowly, their tentacles finally relaxing, are completely insane. We prefer to think of it as pragmatically optimistic, Sullivan replied, pouring coffee into disposable cups. We hope for the best, plan for the worst, and always bring snacks to potential diplomatic incidents. Would you like to try a snickerdoodle? They're cinnamon. And so began humanity's official relationship with the Galactic Council, not with warfare or subjugation, but with coffee, cookies, and the dawning realization that the supposedly primitive species they'd planned to corral had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. In the years that followed, the story of Ambassador Sullivan's first council meeting became something of a legend. Some say the quantum tunneling revelation was an elaborate bluff. Others insist they've seen security footage of him simply appearing in the station's corridors before the meeting. The only thing everyone agrees on is that it's better to have humanity as an ally than an enemy, and that their cookies are surprisingly good. As for Sullivan, he still attends council meetings regularly, always armed with fresh coffee and baked goods. The running joke among junior diplomats is that you can't tell if he's reaching for a cookie or activating some incomprehensible human weapon, and that's exactly how he likes it. After all, the best deterrent isn't the threat you can see. It's the uncertainty about what else might be hiding behind that pleasant smile and offered snickerdoodle. With all due respect, Ambassador Sullivan, High Counselor Thex's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained frustration. You cannot simply install a coffee machine in the sacred chamber of contemplation. Actually, Sullivan replied, carefully measuring out premium Arabica beans. According to Article 7, subsection 12 of the Council's Diplomatic Accommodation Treaty, which you all signed last month, I might add, each member species is entitled to maintain facilities for their essential biological and cultural practices within designated areas of the station. Coffee is not an essential biological need, Ambassador Zixel interjected, their tentacles waving in exasperation. Over the past 6 months, they'd developed what could almost be called a friendship with the human diplomat, though right now they were seriously reconsidering that position. Tell that to anyone who's seen me before my morning cup, Sullivan chuckled, the sophisticated brewing apparatus humming to life. Besides, this isn't just any coffee machine. It's a symbol of humanity's commitment to promoting cross-species dialogue and understanding. It's a caffeine dispensary, Thex stated flatly. It's a diplomatic tool, Sullivan corrected, pulling out his ever-present package of cookies. You'd be amazed how many interstellar incidents can be prevented with a proper cup of coffee and some baked goods. Speaking of which, who'd like to be the first to try my new chocolate chip cookie recipe? I modified it to be safe for silicon-based digestive systems. Several of the younger delegates, who had grown quite fond of Earth's culinary offerings, perked up noticeably. Even Thex's crystalline structure vibrated at a frequency that Sullivan had learned to recognize as interested despite themselves. But before anyone could accept the offered treats, the station's emergency alerts blared to life. Red warning lights bathed the chamber in an ominous glow, and the artificial gravity fluctuated momentarily. Unknown vessels detected, the station's AI announced. Multiple signatures emerging from unregistered quantum tunnels. Attack pattern confirmed. Sullivan's pleasant expression didn't waver, but his eyes took on that dangerous gleam that the council members had learned to watch for. He carefully set down the coffee pot and straightened his tie. "Well," he said, "this is awkward. I don't suppose anyone would like to admit to knowing something about this before I have to make some rather pointed inquiries." The gathered delegates shifted uncomfortably. It was Ambassador Catrix of the Arcturian Confederation who finally spoke up, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in distress patterns. "The Drachnid separatists," they chittered. "They've been threatening action against the Council for cycles, but we never thought they'd actually—" "Ah," Sullivan nodded. "The same Drachnid separatists who were very interested in purchasing some supposedly stolen Earth military tech a few months ago. I do hope nobody here was involved in those negotiations." The silence in the chamber was deafening. Right then, Sullivan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what appeared to be an ordinary Earth smartphone. "If you'll excuse me for a moment, I need to make a call. Also, everyone might want to hold on to something." "Ambassador Sullivan." Thex's voice had taken on an urgent tone. "What are you—" "Hello, this is Ambassador Sullivan," he spoke into the device. "Authentication code, Whiskey Hotel Yankee Echo, Victor Echo November. Please activate protocol, afternoon tea." The station shuddered as multiple quantum tunnels suddenly opened around it. But these weren't the crude, unstable portals the Drachnid ships had used. These were precise, controlled tiers in space-time, and through them came teacups? Hundreds of small, delicate porcelain teacups materialized in space around the station, each trailing a faint blue glow. The Drachnid ships, charging their weapons, suddenly found their targeting systems going haywire. "What you're seeing," Sullivan explained casually to the stunned council members, "is our latest development in drone technology. We call them TEAs, Tactical Engagement Automata. The teacup design was mostly for my amusement, I'll admit. The Quantum Harmonics Division has a surprising sense of humor." The teacups moved with impossible precision, their gentle blue glow intensifying as they surrounded the hostile vessels. Where they passed, shields flickered and weapon systems went dark. "The TEs emit a localized field that temporarily converts all weapon-grade energy emissions into Earl Grey tea," Sullivan continued, watching the display with satisfaction. "Perfectly drinkable, though I personally prefer English breakfast. We found it was a more elegant solution than simple weapon jamming. Also far less paperwork than vaporizing ships." "This is impossible," Zixel whispered, their tentacles curled in disbelief. "Oh, that's nothing," Sullivan grinned. "Wait until you see what happens when I activate the Scone Protocol, though I'm hoping it won't come to that. The cleanup would be messy." On the tactical display, the Drachnid ships hung powerless in space, their fearsome weapons quite literally reduced to tea. Several vessels were actually leaking Earl Grey into space, creating surreal streams of frozen tea crystals that glittered in the starlight. "Now then," Sullivan turned back to the council, his expression pleasant, but his eyes hard as steel. "I think it's time we had a serious discussion about information security and arms trafficking. But first, would anyone like some actual tea? I find it helps with diplomatic negotiations, and we seem to have quite a surplus at the moment." The council chamber remained silent for a long moment before Ambassador Catrix spoke again. "I'll have tea," they said quietly. "And perhaps we should review those intelligence reports about unauthorized technology transfers." "Excellent choice," Sullivan smiled, reaching for his newly installed coffee machine. "I assume everyone remembers Article 9 of the Cooperation Treaty? The one about full disclosure of security threats? Consider this a practical demonstration of why honesty is the best policy. Now, who'd like to start?" As the delegates settled in for what promised to be a very long and uncomfortable debriefing session, Sullivan began preparing drinks with his usual methodical care. Outside the station, the TEAs continued their patrol, their gentle blue glow a reminder that humanity's approach to peacekeeping was unique in the galaxy. Sophisticated, slightly absurd, and absolutely effective. The Drachnid ships would eventually be allowed to limp home, their holds inexplicably full of perfectly brewed tea, and their captains nursing wounded pride. The incident would go down in council records as the Earl Grey affair, and it served as a lasting reminder that while humanity was always happy to share refreshments, they were capable of turning anything, even a cup of tea, into a weapon when necessary. As for the coffee machine in the sacred chamber of contemplation, it stayed right where it was. After all, no one could prove it wasn't essential to preventing interstellar incidents. And if more and more delegates began starting their sessions with a cup of Earth's finest brew, well, that was just good diplomacy in action. You did what? Ambassador Sullivan's perpetually pleasant expression flickered for the first time in recorded council history. Several delegates instinctively moved their anti-grav seats backward. High Counselor Thex's crystalline structure vibrated at what could only be described as a nervous frequency. We merely authorized a small scientific expedition to Earth's Sol system to study your star's unique properties. The expedition that somehow ended up in Jupiter's orbit? Sullivan asked, his voice dangerously calm as he methodically prepared his morning coffee. The one currently attempting to harvest antimatter from our carefully maintained containment fields? We didn't know they were containment fields. Ambassador Zixel interjected, their tentacles twisting anxiously. The energy signatures appeared natural. Yes, because we designed them to look natural, Sullivan sighed, taking a long sip from his coffee. Those containment fields are part of our solar system's defensive grid. Jupiter isn't just a gas giant. It's our emergency fuel reserve and waste management facility. The council chamber fell into stunned silence, broken only by the gentle whir of Sullivan's coffee machine. Let me explain this in simple terms, he continued, pulling out a fresh package of cookies. Stress baking, some delegates noted worriedly. Humanity didn't just build weapons and shields. We transformed our entire solar system into an integrated defense and resource management network. Those natural phenomena your expedition is poking at, they're keeping about 6,000 years' worth of antimatter waste from our power plants safely contained within Jupiter's magnetic field. That's impossible, one of the junior delegates squeaked. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical? Sullivan smiled. Yes, they are. That's why we built Dyson swarms around Mercury. The antimatter containment fields are just a beneficial side effect of our waste management system. Really, it's just basic environmental responsibility. You didn't think we'd just leave hazardous materials floating around, did you? The council members exchanged horrified glances as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just advanced beyond their expectations. They'd fundamentally reorganized their entire solar system into a vast machine. Now, Sullivan continued, his tone still pleasantly conversational as he distributed cookies. I've already sent instructions to our Jupiter facility to guide your expedition safely away from the containment fields. But this raises some concerns about communication and transparency between council members. He pulled out his notorious smartphone, and several delegates flinched, probably remembering the Earl Grey affair. Don't worry, he chuckled. No T-based weapons today. I'm just pulling up the latest draft of our proposed solar system tourism and safety guidelines. I think this incident highlights the need for proper visitor protocols. The chamber's holographic display came to life, showing a cheerful infographic labeled, "Welcome to Sol, a visitor's guide to not accidentally destroying yourself." As you can see, Sullivan gestured to the rotating display, we've prepared comprehensive materials about safe travel corridors, designated observation areas, and restricted zones. We even included a section about the proper forms to file for antimatter waste disposal permits, though I suspect that won't be relevant for most species yet. Ambassador Sullivan, Thex interrupted, their crystalline form still vibrating anxiously. Are you suggesting that Earth has been secretly operating as a system-wide antimatter power plant? Oh, not secretly at all, Sullivan corrected, finishing his coffee. It was all in the technical appendices of our first contact package. Page 47,392, I believe, right after the section about our Mars terraforming project, and before the notes on our Venus weather control system. Nobody reads the technical appendices, Ambassador Zixel exclaimed. Well, that's hardly our fault, is it? Sullivan replied mildly. We believe in full disclosure. It's not our problem if other species find our technical documentation intimidating. He stood up, straightening his tie, a gesture that several council members had learned to associate with incoming diplomatic bombshells. Now, I propose we establish a proper system for coordinating scientific expeditions. Earth is happy to share our solar engineering expertise, but we need to ensure everyone's safety. After all, we wouldn't want anyone accidentally disrupting the quantum stabilization fields around Saturn. The what around Saturn? Someone whispered. Oh, didn't you know? Sullivan's smile widened slightly. Those lovely rings aren't just ice and rock anymore. They're actually a particle accelerator array. Very efficient design. The orbital mechanics do most of the work for us. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Several delegates were frantically calling their scientific advisors, while others seemed to be having existential crises about their species' place in the galactic hierarchy. Now, Sullivan called over the commotion. There's no need for panic. Earth is committed to peaceful cooperation and scientific exchange. We just ask that you follow proper safety protocols and file the appropriate paperwork. He paused thoughtfully. Also, please stop trying to steal our antimatter. It's rather awkward for everyone involved, and the paperwork for containment breaches is absolutely nightmarish. The paperwork, Ambassador Catrix managed weakly, their bioluminescence flickering in disbelief. You're worried about the paperwork when you've turned the largest planet in your system into an antimatter storage facility? Proper documentation is important, Sullivan said primly, reaching for the coffee pot. Now, who'd like to review the new visitor guidelines? I had them translated into all council languages. There's a lovely section about acceptable selfie distances from the Mercury Dyson swarms. As the shell-shocked council members began reviewing the documentation, Sullivan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Sometimes the best way to prevent interstellar incidents was to remind everyone that humanity's apparent hospitality was backed by engineering on a cosmic scale. And if the council happened to notice that Earth's visitor guidelines bore a striking resemblance to military containment protocols, well, that was just efficient documentation management. Oh, and one more thing, Sullivan added casually. We're hosting an open house at our Titan manufacturing facility next month. There will be refreshments, guided tours, and a demonstration of our zero-point energy extraction systems. I do hope you'll all attend. I'm trying out a new recipe for quantum-stabilized cupcakes. The Titan manufacturing facility open house was going splendidly, until the Proximan delegation tried to smuggle in a quantum scanner disguised as a dessert fork. Really? Sullivan said, examining the sophisticated device with an expression of mild disappointment. A fork? I must say the craftsmanship is excellent, but did you really think we wouldn't notice? We literally built this moon. The Proximan delegate's secondary breathing sacs deflated in embarrassment. Built the moon? Well, technically we rebuilt it, Sullivan clarified, carefully setting the fork scanner aside. The original Titan was a bit too organic for our manufacturing needs. Don't worry. We preserved all the interesting biochemistry in a museum on Europa. Now, would anyone like to try the quantum-stabilized cupcakes? The frosting exists in a superposition of chocolate and vanilla until you bite into it. The gathered diplomats stared at their refreshments with newfound concern. Oh, they're perfectly safe, Sullivan assured them, taking a bite of his own cupcake. The quantum effects are contained entirely within the frosting matrix. Though I should mention that the sprinkles are actually microscopic maintenance nanites. They help with digestion. You fed us nanites? Ambassador Zixel's tentacles coiled in alarm. Technically, you're always full of nanites here on Titan, Sullivan smiled. The whole moon is essentially one big nanoforge. How did you think we maintain atmospheric pressure in a facility that's technically larger than the moon itself? He gestured to the vast manufacturing floor below the observation deck, where impossible geometries folded in on themselves as matter was assembled and disassembled at the atomic level. The facility stretched on far beyond what should have been Titan's physical boundaries. We use spatial compression fields, he explained, noting the confused expressions. The exterior of Titan maintains its original dimensions to avoid disrupting Saturn's orbital mechanics, but the interior space is somewhat larger. Think of it as very efficient storage management. How much larger? High Counselor Thex asked, their crystalline structure vibrating with scientific curiosity despite their obvious concern. Currently? Sullivan checked his watch. About the volume of Earth's Pacific Ocean, give or take a few cubic kilometers. We're thinking of expanding next quarter, but the paperwork for dimensional variances is quite tedious. A distant boom echoed through the facility, followed by a slight tremor. Sullivan's perpetual smile tightened fractionally. Ah, he said, tapping his smartphone. It seems someone just tried to access production-level Omega without proper clearance. Would the Drachnid delegation please account for all their members, particularly the ones who were asking very detailed questions about our matter compilation processes? The Drachnids shifted uncomfortably, their scales changing color in patterns that indicated extreme nervousness. No takers? Sullivan sighed. Very well. Initiating protocol. High T. The familiar blue glow of T units began emanating from the facility's walls. Several delegates groaned. Not to worry, Sullivan assured them. This is just a standard security response. The intruder will be safely contained in a quantum bubble and offered a selection of fine teas until we can sort this out. Though I should mention that time moves somewhat differently in those bubbles. From their perspective, they might be enjoying tea for anywhere between 5 minutes and several centuries. You weaponized temporal mechanics? Ambassador Catrix's bioluminescence flickered in disbelief. Weaponized is such a harsh word, Sullivan objected, straightening his tie. We simply created a very thorough customer service experience. Speaking of which, would anyone care to explain why 3 different species brought quantum scanning devices to what was meant to be a friendly open house? He pulled out a collection of seemingly innocent objects. A brooch, a ceremonial sash, and what appeared to be a decorative antenna extension. The scanners are beautifully made, I'll grant you that. Our engineers are quite impressed. In fact, we'd love to discuss technology sharing agreements with your respective species, after we address the rather pressing matter of industrial espionage. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of matter being reorganized at the quantum level. Now, Sullivan continued, pulling out a fresh batch of cookies. We have 2 options. 1. We can spend the next several cycles dealing with formal investigations, sanctions, and all the associated diplomatic unpleasantness. Or 2. Everyone can acknowledge their attempts at corporate espionage, agree to proper technology sharing protocols, and we can all enjoy these lovely dark matter chocolate chip cookies I just baked. Dark matter? Cookies? Someone whispered. Oh yes, Sullivan beamed. They're quite special. The dark matter adds a lovely texture, and they're technically lighter than air. They also happen to be an excellent demonstration of our particle physics capabilities. Anyone interested in the recipe will need to sign our standard non-proliferation agreements, of course. One by one, the guilty parties stepped forward to confess their espionage attempts. As it turned out, the promise of exotic physics pastries was a surprisingly effective diplomatic tool. Excellent, Sullivan said once all the scanners had been surrendered. Now who'd like a tour of our quantum bakery? It's where we test new recipes for stable matter configurations. We're working on a soufflé that briefly violates the laws of thermodynamics. As the chastened diplomats followed Sullivan deeper into the impossibly vast facility, Ambassador Zixel moved closer to High Counselor Thex. Did you know, they whispered, that humans have a saying, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar? What's vinegar? Thex asked. I'm not sure, Zixel admitted, but I'm beginning to think humanity's real superweapon isn't their technology. It's their ability to make violations of fundamental physics seem perfectly reasonable, as long as they're served with baked goods. Somewhere in the depths of Titan, matter continued to rearrange itself according to human designs, while a very confused Drachnid spy found themselves trapped in a pleasant tea room, with an infinite supply of Earl Grey and a temporal dynamics textbook. Just another normal day in humanity's impossibly engineered solar system. Ambassador Sullivan, High Counselor Thex's crystalline form was vibrating at what could only be described as panic frequency. Please explain why there appears to be a second Earth in your solar system. Sullivan glanced up from his morning coffee preparation ritual, his expression as unruffled as ever. Oh, you noticed that? I was wondering when someone would spot it. Would you like some coffee while we discuss parallel dimensional engineering? The emergency council session had been called after the Arcturian long-range sensors detected what appeared to be an exact duplicate of Earth sitting quietly in the L4 Lagrange point of Earth's orbit. The fact that it had apparently been there for some time without anyone noticing was causing considerable distress among the council's scientific community. This is beyond mere treaty violations! Ambassador Zixel's tentacles were literally tied in knots. You can't just create planetary duplicates without informing the council. Actually, Sullivan said, carefully measuring out coffee beans. According to Article 47, subsection 93 of the updated Sol System Tourism and Safety Guidelines, which you all signed last month, Earth reserves the right to maintain reasonable backup systems for critical infrastructure. A backup planet is not reasonable, someone shouted from the back of the chamber. That's rather subjective, isn't it? Sullivan replied mildly. Besides, it's not a complete duplicate. Earth B, as we call it, is more of a developmental test environment. You know how it is. You don't want to try out new planetary engineering techniques on your production instance. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Several delegates appeared to be having existential crises, while others were frantically attempting to recalculate their species' technological development timelines. Now, Sullivan called over the commotion. There's no need for alarm. Earth B is perfectly stable. We maintain it in a slightly phase-shifted dimensional state to avoid gravitational complications. Though I should mention that this is why we had to ask the Proximan delegation to stop testing their new stealth drives in that sector. The dimensional harmonics were causing some rather interesting weather patterns on both Earths. Both Earths, Thex repeated weakly. Ambassador Sullivan, are you telling us that humanity has mastered planetary-scale dimensional engineering just to have a backup testing server? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds a bit excessive, Sullivan admitted, distributing coffee cups. But think of it as responsible development practices. You wouldn't push untested code to production, would you? Same principle applies to planetary engineering. Earth B lets us test things like climate modification algorithms, tectonic plate adjustments, and new coffee bean varieties without risking our primary biosphere. He paused thoughtfully. Would anyone like to try some quantum-grown coffee? It's from Earth B's Experimental Agricultural Division. The beans exist in a superposition of multiple flavor states until you drink them. Is everything about coffee with you humans? Ambassador Catrix chittered nervously. Not everything, Sullivan smiled. Sometimes it's about tea. Speaking of which, how is the Drachnid spy enjoying their temporal tea party? It's been about 3 subjective centuries for them now, I believe. They've submitted 17 different formal apologies and written a comprehensive thesis on quantum mechanics, Zixel reported. Their lawyers are requesting temporal asylum. Wonderful progress, Sullivan nodded. I'll have them transferred to the rehabilitation facility on Earth B. The timeline there runs at quarter speed. Excellent for anger management programs. Another alarm blared through the chamber. Sullivan checked his smartphone and sighed. It seems, he said with just a hint of irritation, that someone is attempting to scan Earth B with a dimensional resonance probe. Would the Morphosian delegation care to explain why their science vessel is trying to peek between dimensions without filling out the proper paperwork? The Morphosian representatives began stress-dissolving their outer membranes. Your civilization has maintained a dimensional duplicate of your homeworld for testing purposes, one of them burbled defensively. And you're concerned about paperwork? Proper documentation is essential for interdimensional safety, Sullivan said firmly. Also, might I remind everyone that unauthorized dimensional scans can have unexpected side effects? The last time someone tried this, we ended up with a third Earth for about 6 hours. The cleanup protocols were terribly inconvenient. He tapped his phone, and the familiar blue glow of T units began to emerge from the walls. Don't worry, he assured the panicking Morphosians. The Ts are just going to escort your vessel to a safe distance. Though I should mention that these units are running our new Earl Grey quantum blend. It not only converts weapon energy into T, but also temporarily shifts the target slightly out of phase with normal spacetime. Makes for a very contemplative experience. Is there anything you humans haven't weaponized? Thex demanded. Of course, Sullivan replied cheerfully. We have lots of purely peaceful technology. For instance, the coffee machine I installed in the sacred chamber of contemplation is completely standard. Well, except for the quantum uncertainty filters, and the temporal stabilization field, and the emergency defense protocols. Actually, never mind. Bad example. He straightened his tie and gestured to the chamber's main display, which showed a spectacular view of Earth B gleaming serenely in space. Look, he said. Humanity understands that our approach to engineering might seem a bit excessive, but we believe in being thorough. Yes, we made a backup Earth. Yes, we use it to test new technology. Yes, we might have accidentally created a few temporary duplicate planets during the development process, but everything is perfectly documented, and safety protocols are in place. In triplicate, I assume, Zixel muttered. Naturally, Sullivan beamed. Now, who would like to submit a proper application for a guided tour of Earth B's experimental districts? We've just finished installing a lovely artificial archipelago where the laws of physics are more of a polite suggestion. The restaurants there are amazing, though I should warn you that the desserts sometimes spontaneously change flavor profiles due to quantum fluctuations. As the stunned council members tried to process the idea of backup planets and physics-optional dining experiences, Sullivan calmly finished his quantum coffee. After all, it had been a relatively quiet day by human standards. Nobody had even noticed Earth C yet, quietly orbiting in the asteroid belt, running simulations of alternative evolutionary pathways. But that, Sullivan decided, was probably a discussion for another day. One reality-shaking revelation at a time. That was just good diplomacy. More coffee, anyone? He offered. This batch is exhibiting some fascinating quantum entanglement properties. The flavor profile is technically impossible, but Don't worry, we have all the relevant safety certifications.